They sawed that out. And I think probably he didn't know Rick was Beverly. Didn't anyone? Murder. And it went from social stuff. Yeah, sure. I'm just going to say all the apartments are.
Because she's in real estate and she... Well, I would say let himself go. He had long hair and a beard and sometimes wasn't very clean looking. But about 30 days ago, he got his hair cut shorter, shaved most of his beard off, cleaned up himself a lot.
Richard Trenton Chase went by the name of Rick. He went to high school here, Mira Loma, where he graduated in 1968.
Impressions they gave were that he was kind of a quiet individual, withdrawn, one who was non-violent variety, definitely, and he's never involved in any fights or anything of that sort, and yet they all seem to say that he acted rather strangely during his last 2 years in high school and indicated that there'd been some involvement with drugs that might have been responsible for his strange behavior.
Why did you resist the testing so early in the case?
Well, I don't resist a testing. I would rather be the person employing the psychologist myself and obtaining the reports myself before I allow the prosecution to get into the case in that fashion. And whether or not the judge is going to go along with my position or not, I will have to wait and see.
Do you foresee
I do foresee employing a psychologist and a psychiatrist myself and having the man examined, of course, as thoroughly as we can, having in mind the kind of charge it is.
You've said you had a very definite feeling about Rick Chase.
At the time, I told my immediate and distant superiors that my belief was that Richard Chase now was doing things with small animals and birds, killing them, drinking their blood, and that he would graduate to larger animals and eventually to people unless his, mental illness was checked, was treated, and it was going to take some intensive doing. It wasn't going to be done by the facilities we had at Beverly Manor. All we did was keep the man in a semblance of custody. I say semblance because the wall was only about this high in parts around Beverly Manor, and quite a few of the patients at night would go out, go over the wall, and return sometime before dawn. Then we really had no means of preventing this. And Richard Chase also went out at night over the wall.
You know this?
Yeah, one night we went out looking for him. We found him someplace and brought him back.
Gene, I've noticed you're nodding yes as Art talks. Is that the way you feel?
Pretty much the same way. That he needed extensive care. He was not receiving as much care as he should have gotten, or could have gotten. And the whole thing is just a tragedy.
You're sending out letters now? Letters to the families, the survivors?
Trying to tell them how sorry we are and trying to get something done about all this.
Learned that Rick Chase was leaving Beverly Manor. You tried to stop this, but what did you do? How did you try to stop it?
Well, I voiced my objections to the then director of nurses that I didn't feel, as well as many other members of the staff, that Richard was safe to be returned to society. And she didn't seem too sympathetic to that. So then I voiced my objections to everyone in hospital administration, the administrator, program director, the doctor, who unfortunately I can't recall which doctor it was. And then I called the county conservator's office, and
No one wanted to help them.
no,
Nothing they could do.
no. It was just part of the, it was his turn to be released, and anything that we had to say or do about it was just irrelevant.
You had a feeling about Rick, didn't you?
Well, yeah, a very decided feeling that he was sick and dangerous.
Did you ever enter anything on any records about that?
I believe I did in,
What did
in
you
his
say?
medical chart. Well, as I said earlier, because of the nature of, the way we have to write things in the charts, and not be too presumptuous as to diagnose or anything of that nature. I'm not certain just how I worded it, but I got the idea across, at least I think I did, that my opinion, professional opinion, was that he needed much further treatment evaluation.
But that feeling...
Well, when the instances took place last week where the people were killed, and we discovered who it was, I was very upset at the time Mr. Chase was released, and I was very upset when I heard what he'd done, and I didn't feel that the blame for his action rested solely with him, that there were others who were in control of the situation who allowed this to happen. They were forewarned, not just by myself, but by many people at the hospital, that this guy was dangerous and shouldn't be released because he was sick. And I feel that part of the blame and responsibility rests with those people who just decided to ignore. We're professional staff. We're there to do a function. We are in a hospital to take care of these people and report our findings, observations to whomever is interested. And it's on these that they're supposed to make their judgments and evaluations as to when they turn someone loose.
Gene,
Obviously, it wasn't the case.
Gene, I noticed you were nodding there when he was talking about the laws and what have you and people. What do you... How do you feel about it? How do you feel about it?
Just that pretty much the same thing Art said, that we wished he could have had more care and that he never should have been turned loose back into society.
Those are nice warm lights.
Badge, where's that badge?
Put your coat over.
That's not nice.
There's a couple.
Now look, wait for the stenographer to go. Is she back there? Stenographer? Who? Stenographer.
Court reporter? No.
That's well.
What we got going on in there?
Chase's attorney says he intends to ask his client about the 6 murders of which he is accused. That testimony will probably come on Monday and will take some time as this case enters its 16th week.
Mr. Salami, we have a verdict. No, I'm not kidding.
You must be disappointed in the verdict.
Well, I don't like to discuss my personal feelings in these things. There's not too much I could comment on. We're still in the middle of it. The jury has to come back and hear, further arguments on the other issues. And as far as my personal views, I think I'll just keep them personal.
You're going to press for capital punishment in this case?
Well, there's no secret about that. We've said from the beginning that we intend to ask for the death penalty. Nothing has changed, that nothing has happened that would cause us to change our intention about the death penalty.
Reading this jury now, what do you think?
I'm not going to comment on that either.
The jury comes back on Monday to hear lawyers' arguments on the issue of Chase's sanity and then to deliberate that. If he is found sane, and at this point that would seem likely in view of the verdicts today, the penalty phase of the trial will begin. The jury could decide that Chase should die in the San Quentin gas chamber or that he should go to prison for the rest of his life without possibility of parole. If he is found insane, he would be sent to a state mental hospital.
Because the test is new, because the law of diminished capacity is so much up in the air, this may well be a case which the court fixes upon to clarify the law or change the law. A lot of different respects. One might be the role of psychiatrists in determining responsibility, or to make clearer the defense of diminished capacity, which the California Supreme Court recently said is convoluted and inconsistent. It's obvious it needs to be clarified.
I worked as hard as I could, and even though he has expressed dissatisfaction from time to time with counsel, it hasn't affected my interest in trying to do the best job I could in his behalf. As to matter of a fair trial overall in the case, we have over the past year, addressed ourselves to points that the court has ruled against me on, and that's not to say it's not fair, but we have lost points of argument many times.
Wednesday is the date set for the next step in this trial, the penalty phase. The same jury that sat here for nearly 5 months and that found Chase guilty and sane will now decide whether he lives in the state prison or dies in the state gas chamber. The judge can overrule a death penalty verdict if he wishes.
Well, one likes to think that, you know, the law operates equally, you know, throughout the state, throughout the country, and it seems like the verdicts were sufficiently inconsistent, having in mind the, you know, the conduct involved, that it was worthy of mention, and that perhaps this case, you know, having in mind the result in the Dan White case, could have received a life sentence.
Justice should not be reduced to the lowest common denominator. What the jury is doing is rendering a moral judgment about moral culpability in light of community standards of blameworthiness. If the standards of blameworthiness in San Francisco are as they may have been, as reflected by the Dan White verdicts, then that's San Francisco. We're talking about community standards of blameworthiness, and I don't think that if those are San Francisco standards of blameworthiness, that the whole state ought to be saddled with that kind of criterion.
There were so many murders in this case. They were so violent and gruesome that even though the defendant mental condition was such that it was thoroughly litigated before the jury, it is a mitigating factor, but I didn't think it outweighed the aggravating factors. And in my mind alone, the murder of the 22-month-old baby, in which the defendant decapitated the child, and the circumstances surrounding that murder itself was sufficient to impose the death penalty, aside from the other 5 persons that he killed.
Within 10 days, Richard Chase will be taken from the jail here to San Quentin State Prison, where he will be housed on condemned row. His appeals could and probably will take years, for the state Supreme Court has other appeals to rule on first, and the justices have yet to rule on the constitutionality of California's death penalty laws. Spencer Michaels for Channel 3 reports in Palo Alto.